There's a lot of discussion in and around Demon Slayer regarding the upper moons and specifically the power gaps between them all. From surface level, this seems to not be the case, as the 12 Kizuki are constructed in order of power just by simple deduction of the series, without being outright admitted by Muzan, but sort of implied through a narrator statement saying that the weakest of the 12 Kizuki is lower 6, and the strongest is upper 1. This outright confirms Kokushibo is the strongest demon in the world outside of Muzan, and heavily implies that the ranks are in order from 1 to 6 with the upper moons, and the lower moons stacking right behind that being ordered 1 to 6 as well. However, we get more information in chapter 99 with Kokushibo confronting Akaza about his behavior towards Doma, who is upper rank 2, saying that if he doesn't like the hierarchy, then Akaza should request blood combat to replace Doma as the new upper rank 2. This tells us that demons could potentially surpass one another and not achieve a rank higher. And additionally, the fanbook gives us an example of a situation where a member of the 12 Kizuki is actually stronger than their rank. This being Rui, who is noted to have strength equivalent to Lower Moon 1 or 2 despite being Lower Moon 5. He just simply doesn't care about his rank. This has led many fans of the series to speculate about how the upper ranks compare to each other and speculate if some are actually stronger than their rank. In order of strongest to weakest, we will be looking at information that could help us deduce how demons compare to each other and if it's actually true that the upper moons are in the correct order. Starting with Kokushibo, like I mentioned earlier, it's a narrator statement in chapter 52 that says upper 1 is the strongest, so we can just move on to Doma. The case for Doma being stronger than Akaza is very simple. Kokushibo recommended to Akaza that he request blood combat to replace Doma, an offer that Akaza never takes up with Doma or brings up to Muzan. He very clearly hates Doma by just looking at the scenes of them interacting like bro cannot stand him. So any chance he could take to surpass him you think he would take? Akaza is also angrily drawn with an ellipses when Kokushibo told him to request a blood battle, which typically indicates pause or hesitation. And this pause I don't think was out of respect for Kokushibo or fear of Kokushibo, since right after this he tells Kokushibo that he plans to eventually kill him. So this likely means that Akaza paused and didn't say anything in this moment because he believes Doma is more powerful than him. You might be able to imply that it's a pretty big gap, since maybe Akaza would challenge Doma if he thought there was a chance he could beat him. However, this is just conjecture and shouldn't be taken as concrete information. Additionally, in the fanbook, it states that the only time Akaza ever backtalked Muzan was when Doma surpassed him. The most logical conclusion that we can take from this is Muzan made the decision to elevate Doma past Akaza, despite liking Akaza a lot more and giving him special treatment, allowing him to not kill women, and also not be fond of Doma, specifically stated to not really like him. Because of all these factors, I think it's a very safe assumption to say Doma is stronger than Akaza. Now, what exactly you interpret that to mean is up to you. Do you think he just has better abilities in the form of blood demon arts? Do you think he has better regeneration, superior speed? I think it makes sense that he just holistically is a stronger combatant than Akaza, and maybe not all of his abilities surpass Akaza. Like, we see his durability doesn't seem to be very high, as Kano pretty easily cuts through his belly, but holistically I think he would just be a stronger combatant than Akaza. Akaza should also be stronger than upper rank 4, and this is a bit harder to prove, but I think by feats he at least has a higher assertion. Since Tanjiro, when he gets massively stronger in the Infinity Castle after Hashira training, and even impresses Gyu with his abilities, is sort of struggling to react to Akaza and is taking damage just by blocking Akaza's attacks. And he then gets another power up with the see-through world and then takes severe damage from Akaza's final form. These are much better feats than anything Zohakuten shows on a massively weaker Mark Tanjiro that also doesn't have the see-through world. And I think this safely puts him a tier above Hantengu, which should mean upper ranks 1 to 3 are in the correct order. And we're going to talk more about Zohakuten in a second here, so don't worry, we will definitely get to him, but I just think Akaza has more impressive feats and should have higher assertions than Hantengu. Upper ranks 4 through 6, that being Hantengu, Gyoko, and Gyutaro respectively, are the usual suspects for saying one upper moon is just outright stronger than one ranked above them. And while I think this is the most interesting to talk about, a lot of the scaling chains that people just try to compare these fighters with are complete buns and or just don't work for a multitude of reasons. And I think we can make some specific comparisons to Gyutaro and Zohakuten. The common link here again is Tanjiro, and in his fight with Gyutaro, Tanjiro does a few impressive things that are worth noting. First, I want to point out how nerfed this Tanjiro actually was before he does anything impressive. He is initially fear hacked by Daki so badly he can't even fight properly, and after he overcomes this fear, he then fights Daki to the point of fatigue, where he nearly dies. This is the most fatigued Tanjiro has ever been in the series. This being stated in chapter 82, when Tanjiro has blood dripping out of his eyes, he's completely past his physical limit and is burning down his second human limitation, his very life force, and when that limitation is passed, death occurs. It's both stated and shown that Tanjiro is about to pass this limit and die, and if it wasn't for Nezuko's intervention when Tanjiro reached this limit, he likely would have been immediately killed by Daki, or died trying to fend her off from his fatigue. Tanjiro then passes out from exhaustion, and after some brief amount of undisclosed time, comes back to help Tengen fight Gyutaro. He nearly gets blitzed pretty badly by Gyutaro, but it's shown he can still mentally understand what's going on, despite not being able to properly and physically react. With him also being potentially fear hacks here, as he notes he's covered in goosebumps and has to reaffirm himself to stand strong. This heavily fatigued Tanjiro then later adapts to Gyutaro enough to dodge one of his strikes, and then attacks pretty close to on par with Poison Tengen's attack speed. However, I think the most impressive thing Tanjiro does is after passing out a second time, that's right, he passes out a second time in this fight, he tricks Gyutaro by headbutting him and secretly stabbing him with a Wisteria Kunai to poison him. This isn't actually the impressive thing I wanted to point out, albeit it is good. But the more important thing is what happens right after this when Tanjiro fails to behead Gyutaro. Gyutaro responds with his Blood Demon art rotating circular slashes. Tanjiro then reacts to this Blood Demon art for multiple panels before being saved by Tengen. Now the poison is slightly suppressing Gyutaro, as Tanjiro notes he's shaking off the poison and his attacks are speeding up, but even in this moment Tanjiro is still reacting to Gyutaro, albeit he is about to get overwhelmed. I really want to reiterate, this is base Tanjiro, who shouldn't be at full capacity, considering he nearly died to fatigue and passed out twice, so this is pretty impressive stuff for Tanjiro. In the following arc, the Swordsmith Village, Tanjiro then gets training with the Orichi Type 0, which gives him precognition with the addition of just being good physical training. He then unlocks the Demon Slayer mark in intervals that allows him to drastically boost his attack power and speed. And this Tanjiro is implied to be heavily inferior to one singular tree dragon head from Zohakuten. Now I say implied because it's hard to directly scale anything that Mark Tanjiro does to Zohakuten. We see Mark Tanjiro challenging Zohakuten and some off-screen fighting occurs, and the next time we cut to them fighting, he's running for his life and is getting overwhelmed by one tree dragon. After he gets outside of the range of the tree dragon head, he's outpaced by its extension ability and promptly eaten. Now this Tanjiro has his own nerfs, with it being noted specifically that his foot is damaged, but he has physical training with the Type 0 doll and the reaction speed boost, and he doesn't even try to cut this head or defend from it in any way. It just seems like this minor ability outsped him, compared to earlier, a fatigued Tanjiro that doesn't have the reaction amp or the physical training amp is reacting to a slightly nerfed Gyutaro's Blood Demon art, and this is only one tiny tree dragon head from Zohakuten, not to mention he has bigger ones that have stronger abilities in the clone abilities, and then even stronger abilities on top of that in the form of his Blood Demon arts. And back to what I was saying earlier, it being sort of implied that Tanjiro is inferior to Zohakuten with his marked form, as his marked form directly challenges Zohakuten, and then we flash forward to see him running away. We have all the instances with Mitsuri. When Mitsuri shows up to save him, he's surprised by her speed and ability to combat Zohakuten, and this Tanjiro has 3 massive boosts. And clearly this would be in relation to his own ability to fight Zohakuten. So if he's this impressed with what Mitsuri's doing against Zohakuten, this just means Mitsuri is stronger than him, which I think is extremely obvious. I don't think you needed me to tell you that. If Tanjiro were granted the 3 major boosts that he gets in this arc, that being the Demon Slayer mark, the training arc with the Type 0, and his new sense of precognition, as well as not being as fatigued as he was when he fought Gyutaro, I think he could perform a lot better against Gyutaro and Daki, maybe even to the point of surpassing them. With all this information, I think it's safe to say Tanjiro isn't on the level of Zohakuten, and it's hard for me to argue that Tanjiro wouldn't perform significantly better against Gyutaro in this form. since he was slightly reacting to Gyutaro's Blood Demon arts and attacks when he was much weaker, and he now has physically improved base stats, attained precognition, has the Demon Slayer mark, and won't be near as fatigued. Now Gyutaro does have AoE abilities and Daki to help him in combat, but Zohakuten also has 3 other Tree Dragon heads that can all use abilities, just as strong as the one Tree Dragon head, and that's not to mention that Zohakuten can command it to use Blood Demon arts, which should be above the normal clone abilities that are spouted from the heads, as Zohakuten uses this in response to Mitsuri's speed, and Mitsuri even gets a bit shaken up when she sees Zohakuten going for this attack. Gyutaro does have Daki for support, but she's about a Perception Blitz tier below Gyutaro himself, so that's a lot worse than just having 3 other Tree Dragon heads, which are all roughly the same in power. Gyutaro also has Blood Blades that he uses to pressure opponents, but Tanjiro could already defend against these when he saved Tengen in the Entertainment District arc. Not to mention Zenitsu and Inosuke in this same arc were also defending against these Blood Blades, so I think Zohakuten, on top of just being faster than Gyutaro, could output more pressure and more dangerous abilities, and has just as hard as a gimmick to pull off to kill him, that being having to find the main body, while fending off Zohakuten himself, so I think he should surpass Gyutaro in pretty much every aspect. Some people have tried to scale Nezuko and reverse engineer this back to Daki based on her performance against the emotion clones of Hantengu, and this doesn't really work for one main reason, being that Nezuko actually gets stronger based on how much of Muzan's blood is in her opponent. This is derived from a statement in the fanbook that says the concentration of Muzan's blood in Daki forces Nezuko's abilities to evolve and gives her overwhelming strength. Earlier in the series, she was just outright contending with the power of the trio of bog demons that had a blood demon art, but then later when she and Tanjiro fight Susumaru and Yahaba, who are noted to be stronger, and approaching 12 Kizuki level at the least, Nezuko's power is stated to be rapidly growing, which makes sense as these two would have a higher concentration of Muzan's blood, and the same logic can be applied for her battle against Upper Rank 4 alongside Tanjiro. She's powering up based on how much of Muzan's blood is present, and thus should scale higher than her previous form against Daki, and that's why she's somewhat able to move on par with the physically superior Tanjiro in that arc, so any backscaling with Nezuko just doesn't really work. That only leaves us with Gyoko, who we basically can't pinpoint anywhere because of his limited interactions with the cast. Gyoko only really fights Muichiro, and Muichiro has no scaling anywhere except slightly stronger than base Tanjiro, by having better reactions and attack speed, as stated by the narrator for reaction speed, and shown with their encounter with Hantengu that he's physically faster than Tanjiro. We don't really know where this base Tanjiro scales in relation to Gyutaro besides having 2 of the 3 amps we talked about previously, that being precognition and physical training with the Type 0 doll. I do think the fact that Gyoko is handling Muichiro with ease, who's stronger than Tanjiro, a Tanjiro with 2 amps from the previous arc, should make him stronger than Gyutaro by feats at the very least. And if you disagree with that, Gyoko has another form to amplify his speed further, give him better durability, and a one-shot hacks ability assuming he touches someone's face to turn them into a fish. That leaves Gyoko and Zohakuten, and I think these two are the closest rivals in the series in terms of upper moons, and there's no real way to pinpoint how strong one should be compared to the other. But if you want a narrative perspective, because of Gyoko's character being extremely egotistical and not caring for any living being other than Muzan, I personally think if he was stronger than Zohakuten, he would have tried to surpass him for no other reason than to impress Muzan or to just stroke his ego, but that's just an opinion of mine and it's not really provable. If you want to take it, so be it. I didn't really plan to talk about Nakame or Kaigaku for this video. I'll say at the very least Kaigaku should be weaker than Gyoko. Since he's Upper Moon 6 and Upper Moon 5 is vacant, that leads me to believe that Muzan probably didn't think Kaigaku was at least Gyoko level, but in terms of how he compares to Gyutaro, we really don't have that much information. As for Nakame, while it's a bit hard to say she's more powerful than the original Upper 4 Hantengu, she's at the very least harder to deal with. since base Mitsuri was enough to at least outpace Zohakuten, and then she goes through the training arc, and Obanai, someone even stronger than her, just outright fails to tag Nakame. But for the original Upper Moons, I do think they are all in the correct order.